Hey guys, welcome in. It's time for 30 books in 30 weeks. I appreciate you all joining me this evening. This is going to be a very serious, albeit brief, conversation about teen suicide and how rampant it's running amongst our young people and in our society. So please, as you come in, share this video out. If you catch it later on the replay, please share it out. Very serious topic, very serious conversation. Lives are at stake. And so the reason why I've chosen to infuse that into my 30 books in 30 weeks series and not do a separate video was because I had already selected this week's book, and it's The Battlefield of the Mind by Joyce Meyer. And suicide and the things that go on in our minds that drive individuals, and particularly teens, to commit suicide is losing that battle. The thoughts that go on in our head and the things that control our minds and our emotions are sometimes out of control. So that's why I'm including that in this week's video. Hey, Elizabeth, as part of the 30 books in 30 weeks. For those of you, I'm sorry, I just got this news, and so I'm a little bit thrown off right now. But for those of you who don't know me, my name is Marcy Batiste. I am a reality-based success and recovery trainer. I do a lot of work with young people. I do a lot of work with women. Much of the work that I do is on, obviously, recovery, trauma recovery, and healing. And so I got a call tonight and found out that my niece, who is 17, found one of her best friends dead this afternoon. He had hung himself. And, you know, her mom asked me, she said, I need some advice. And so I said to her, I said, get her into counseling immediately. Don't wait. Don't settle for school counselors or anything like that. She's going to need post-traumatic stress counseling. She's going to need grief counseling. She's going to need guilt. She's going to have a lot of guilt. What if I had gotten there sooner? Could I have prevented it? What could I have done differently? She's going to begin to internalize these emotions. And I don't know if you guys are really familiar with 17-year-old girls, but they're pretty emotional beings anyway, and tend to internalize a lot of stuff anyway. But the fact that, you know, again, it's hard being away from my family, but because I would like to be there for my sis, I would like to be there for my niece, and I can't be. I am a distance away, and so, but this is a fact of reality, you guys. There are children committing suicide every single day, and much of that is caused by the thoughts that we think, how we internalize messages, how we process or fail to process information, how we're unable to communicate. And so the work that I do on trauma recovery, domestic violence recovery, childhood traumas, abuses, rape, incest, molestation, that's the world that I live in. And unfortunately, suicide is part of that world. Teen suicide is part of that world. But it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be. And, you know, it's about talking to, and it's difficult, I know, to talk to teenagers. It's difficult to get our kids to open up. I understand that. Parents today, you know, I'm so glad that my kids are adults, because we didn't have a social media world when I grew up. And so one of the things, as you guys are letting your kids be on social media, and I don't know the circumstances that surrounded this young man's suicide. All I know is that he's still in high school. He had his entire life to live. It's senior year. That should be the time when you're feeling the best and you're feeling like you have unlimited potential. And so to imagine that this young man felt so closed off and so isolated that his only out was to commit suicide is heartbreaking to me. It's absolutely heartbreaking to me. And to know that my niece was going to see her friend, and when she walks in, he had hung himself and he was dead. And so at 17 to find a dead body is one thing, it's bad enough. At 17 to find one of your very close friends dead is very, very traumatic. But then to know that they committed suicide, that's exponentially more traumatic. Because they did have a choice. And so, understanding that this is what our young people are facing, this is what's out there in the real world. When we talk about reality-based living and we talk about open communication and teaching people how to communicate, it occurs to me that if I'm teaching adults how to communicate that don't know how to communicate, who's teaching this to our kids? Who's teaching this to our kids? What outlets do our children have? I was beginning to say earlier, my kids didn't grow up in a social media world. They're older, so they grew up, the internet was really just starting kind of to kick up when my kids were, Facebook wasn't as prevalent as it is. You didn't have Snapchat. Every single thing everyone does is highlighted and it's magnified and it's amplified on social media. And so if you are a kid or a person, a woman, a man, an adult, because adults go through the same thing, where you're constantly comparing your cut room scraps, you're constantly comparing your reality with someone else's highlight reel based on what they put on social media, that can make anyone feel like they're less than. It can make anyone feel like they're not accomplishing, that they're not succeeding, that they don't have a future. I don't know. Did he have problems getting into college? I don't know the details. I'll find that out from my sis in a little bit. But because my book this week was, and the universe always delivers exactly what you need right on time. And so, like I said, I had already selected this book. I selected it actually a couple of weeks ago. It's called Battlefield of the Mind. It's a book by Joyce Meyer, and really she's talking about, for those of you who know Joyce, she operates in a very spiritual, faith-based manner, and much of her communication is based on scripture and that sort of thing. And so this is no kidding, you guys. Before I got this call this evening, I had already talked about what I wanted our selection to be, and it was about Satan setting up strongholds on our minds. And so she talks about a stronghold is an area in which we're held in bondage, imprisoned, due to a certain way of thinking. And so when you think about suicide and you think about why someone will commit suicide, that's the deepest, darkest throes of bondage. That is when you feel like there is nothing else. There is no other way. There's not a stronghold stronger than a drive that's going to make you commit suicide. And so, she goes on to say that the Apostle Paul tells us that we have weapons that we need to overcome Satan's strongholds. But the weapons really are our ability to be independent thinkers. And there's also another book that I refer back to. I actually have it on audio that I listen to. It's called Outwitting the Devil by Napoleon Hill. And it's very similar philosophies, although Napoleon Hill calls it drifting, right? And so what a drifter does, which is similar to what she's saying, Satan puts a stronghold on you, and and Napoleon Hill suggesting that stronghold is for drifters, people who have a tendency to follow the crowd and not think independently. And that stronghold can be broken, but you have to train yourself and condition yourself to think independently and not to go along with the crowd and not to get hung up on, if people like you or if they don't like you, if you're popular, if you're not popular, if you have money, if you don't have money. Like, all of that stuff affects adults. Adults are struggling every single day with this, to the point that sometimes we don't notice that our kids are struggling. We don't notice. It goes unnoticed. Depression in kids goes unnoticed. You've got all kinds of stuff available at the click of a mouse that was not readily and accessible and available to them. And she talks about how the devil argues with us through theories and reasonings. And so when we talk about the stronghold, or we talk about drifting like Napoleon Hill talks about in his book, is really a lot about how do you process that information to force yourself to think independently. And that whole conceptually, that's how I came about with reality-based coaching or reality-based training, is because it forces you to question what you're told to believe. It forces you to think independently. But somebody's got to teach our kids these lessons. Someone has to help them through this process. And so I guess my message tonight, my overreaching message tonight, is talk to the people around you, not even your kids, because there are adults, like I said, that are struggling with this. There are adults that are struggling with self-esteem issues, self-worth issues, value issues, inadequacy issues. Same thing as kids. But it just breaks my heart that you know, my niece is 17. She finds her friend committed suicide. She's looking at his face. She's the one that's got to make the call to report this. That's a lifelong trauma for her. Lifelong trauma. And so, what I told my sis was, you've got to get her into counseling. You have to get her into, and I'm going to talk to her more. She needs to be in reality-based counseling, so that she understands that there's nothing that she did or didn't do that created this situation, nor is there nothing that she did or didn't do that could have prevented it. That whole, if I had only got there sooner, if I had only, what if, shoulda, coulda, woulda. When you're operating in a place of what ifs and shoulda, coulda, wouldas, you're not operating with reality. Reality says, this is what has happened. This is the situation. And then it's about recovery from that point forward. It's about figuring out how to process that information. You go through the dip of grief, right? You follow the pattern. Grief has a natural progression. You follow that progression, you follow that pattern, and then eventually it gets easier. Is she ever going to forget this? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. But here's the thing. Suicide doesn't just affect the person who commits suicide. It affects everyone around them. I'm 1,700 miles away, and his death has now affected me. I'm sharing it on a video with all of you, so his death has now impacted you. So you see, it's a ripple effect. We're all connected in one way, shape, form, or fashion. So making sure that we have that communication, that we make that investment. But if you find yourself struggling, or if you find a teen who's struggling, don't take it for granted. Don't take it lightly. Don't minimize it or think that, oh, it'll pass. It's gonna go away. They're gonna be fine. And like I said, I'm using teens because that was the call that I got this evening, less than an hour ago, actually. And don't take it for granted, but understand that, be there, be a listening ear, suggest help. And if you yourself are struggling, get help. My inbox is open 24 hours a day. Yeah. So that's my message for tonight. It's, like this week, we're on week 15 of 30 books in 30 weeks. This week's book is Battlefield of the Mind. So we're going to invest an entire week talking about healing and recovery through changing your thinking, your thought process. And that's a huge part of what I do with reality-based training and coaching. So if you need anything, if you want to sign up for a program, let me know. If you have questions, let me know. I'm here. All right. Thanks, guys. Sorry for the heavy message, but I just felt that it was necessary and important to share. So everyone try and have a good night. I'm going to follow up with my family and try and get to the bottom of what's going on. And please do the same. Don't take it for granted. Don't brush it under the rug. Don't think that it'll go away, because it might not. And then you don't get a second chance to say, how can I help? So that's the message for tonight, guys. Thanks for living life on Mars, and we'll talk soon.